I'm Alex Harding. I am a senior here at Ohio State and a member of the Sports Analytics Association. Today here with me, we have Zach, we have Justin, we have Mark, and I thought we would get started here by just letting you all introduce yourselves, talk a little about what you do, maybe your journey to get there, anything else you'd like to share with our group here. So Zach, why don't you get us started?
Sure, thank you. So right now I'm a data scientist at Unabated. I've been there for about 3 months now, I think, and I graduated Ohio State in 2020. And then last year I worked with NFL Next Gen Stats in a seasonal role. And I think probably everyone's going to say their journey is not like any normal one, because I kind of think that's how this industry goes. But I went 5 years in school. I switched majors and stuff, so definitely not a pretty normal journey from what I thought it would be going in. But did a lot of work with Dr. Dre for a while. I was at Ohio State and a lot of research on the side like that. So yeah, that's about it. Brings me up to here. Participated in some of OSU's like sports and society initiative challenges, things like that. But yeah, that's about it.
Thank you very much. Justin, what about you?
Hi, thanks for having me on. Hope everyone's doing well. I graduated Ohio State with a degree in industrial engineering back in 2018. As Zach mentioned, all the paths are pretty unique. My particular path began with the LA Dodgers as a video manager. I actually balanced my last semester of school with my final semester, or with my first internship in baseball. So it was a really unique situation where I was taking finals out of a Hilton hotel in Phoenix, Arizona. After that, I took an internship with the Marlins in the analytics department. And after the internship concluded, I moved to the amateur scouting department, in which I became an analyst. I am now going into my 3rd year as an analyst, and that is all for me.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Mark.
Yeah, to echo the same, thank you all for having me. Happy to be here. So I am currently the manager of baseball operations with the Cincinnati Reds. This was my 6th season here in Cincinnati. My career, I guess, started in minor league baseball. I, as similar to Justin, studied industrial and systems engineering at the University of Florida. Spent a year in graduate school, but my first role was as an intern with the Greenville Astros in the Appalachian League. So, kind of minor league baseball, rookie level. Really just trying to get my foot in the door and start to build relationships within the game. Was fortunate to get connected to the Detroit Tigers organization, spent another year as an amateur scouting intern with that organization. Following that year, spent a year in Cincinnati as a baseball operations intern, and then came on full-time starting in 2017.
Thank you very much. I think that just goes to show that there's no one right way to do this. Everybody's got to get their start somewhere, and there's no one right place for that to be. To start things off, I think a lot of people here are interested in what they need to know to kind of be you guys in the future, to get those jobs. And so I was hoping you all could talk a little about what skills are sought after in the industry, or things that you would recommend for people to pick up and learn. We want to start off with Justin.
Sure. So I think one of the things that is pretty simple, but it's effective in standing out, is being really good at communication and organization. There's a lot of resumes that get floated to almost any position. A lot of positions in baseball are pretty low supply, pretty high demand. And one of the ways to stand out outside of some of the other stuff that, I'm sure the other guys can attest to, the technical experience and the creativity, is just finding ways to effectively communicate and show that you can be not only organized, but you can present any kind of information to a variety of people. In my role in particular, it's pretty critical. We have about 20 scouts between the area scouts, the cross checkers, the regional guys, and the national team. And they all have a variety of backgrounds, a variety of, different technical experiences. And so communicating one idea to a bunch of different backgrounds it's something that is definitely worthwhile, because I'm sure that's not just in amateur scouting department, but in some of the other departments such as player development and analytics, which I've dipped my feet in as well. There's a whole bunch of people that, can have a ton of strengths that might counter your weaknesses and vice versa. So be able to synthesize your ideas and not overwhelm people with a lot of information is a very key skill that I've definitely had to refine as I continue my career in baseball.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. The number one thing I kind of wrote down was just, like Justin said, communicating like data or technical like topics to non-technical people. And for me right now, just being in a startup and not in a team setting, it's not as critical. But having gone through a lot of interviews for teams and having talked to both the data side and more the like scouting side to kind of present ideas to them, it's, even before you get the job, you kind of have to prove that you're able to do that. And so it's, they know how important that is, and that's something that's hard to kind of get through a classroom setting, but it is a really important thing to be able to do.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. In terms of hard skills, my recommendation typically starts with SQL, with being able to, query a database and create your own data sets. And I think kind of building up from there, I don't think it's any sort of secret sauce. R, Python, these types of programming languages that allow you to transform or create interesting visualizations are in demand. The other thing I would say in terms of trying to figure out what some of these skills are or what clubs or organizations are looking for, I would highly recommend following along with what clubs are posting, reading through job descriptions, job postings. I think clubs are getting more technical and more detailed in the types of language they're using to describe what they're looking for in prospective candidates.
Yeah, it's definitely a good idea to kind of do your own research and see what people are looking for. To go off of that, since you are in the industry, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with it. Could you each maybe talk a little about what a typical like application process for your kind of job would be, or application processes that you've been through in the past? Mark, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, so for us with the Reds, and in my experience in professional baseball, a lot of hiring processes begin with some sort of public posting. That is most commonly, I would say, on Teamwork Online. But I know in recent past, publications such as Fangraphs have begun posting or publicizing available opportunities. And so, my recommendation is always to apply for as many jobs as you feel you're qualified for. In terms of the remainder of the process, for us, we typically go through a resume review stage, in which we're sorting and filtering candidates based on the specifics of each role. We will typically try to do some sort of questionnaire where we're presenting questions to that subset of candidates. Depending on the type of role, maybe, a problem set of some kind. Again, as these guys mentioned, right, to try to get a feel for what types of skills each individual has, how they're able to communicate their ideas. We will typically then go through some sort of interview stage. In today's world, those are mostly virtually via Zoom now. But slowly, it seems like we're getting back to some more in-person interview opportunities. And, from there, depending on what the candidate pool looks like, either some sort of second round or final decision. But those are kind of the three common stages for us, and then in my experience.
Yeah, I'd say the experiences I've had are pretty similar, usually from what I've seen. At least for football, which is where a lot of the jobs I applied for were, they're asking for, a lot of relevant work within that job posting. So, on top of a resume and cover letter, they want to see that you've done projects that are relevant and can help them, even if it's not, the secret sauce, but it's something that how to apply, within the sport or within sports data in general, since it is, different than other data a lot of times. But for me, after that, like if you make it to the next step, it's usually been some sort of questionnaire, whether it's like an introductory interview or kind of like a written format, like almost like a 10-question quiz type of thing. But then always some kind of technical exam, usually like take home, maybe a week that they give you like some sort of data science project of, here's this data set, here's some questions we had, or how would you attack this type of thing. And a lot of times I think, at least from the feedback I've gotten, they just want to see how you're thinking and how you're attacking it. So it's not always about, you have to get, the lowest error on your model or anything like that, but they want to see if you have the right mindset to work, for that team or for that company and with that relevant data.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I think they covered a lot of the experiences that I've had on both sides of it, the interviewee and the interviewer. An introductory questionnaire is pretty common, and then 1 or 2 behavioral interviews with members of the department in hiring positions. That typically gets followed by some kind of technical questionnaire that varies in length and difficulty depending on the position that is being opened up. And then the final stage, there's typically some kind of panel interview or they make you do some kind of project, a mini project, and then present it to one or multiple members of the department. And so it's pretty common to have multiple phases and for it to be a longer process, perhaps, than some other industries. And it's meant to kind of wean out some of the applications because, like I mentioned earlier, there tends to be a lot that come through the desk. So.
Yeah, that's great insight. And I know, Zach, you've mentioned a couple of times now, research and projects and just kind of getting your work out there. Do you think that's just the best way to kind of get your foot in the door and to boost your resume, or are there other ways you can go about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great because just doing work on the side, or whether it's through school or through kind of more concrete, like challenges or things that are set up like a big data bowl or a hackathon or something. It's really a perfect storm. You get to build your skills, you get more experience. Usually you get to either present data or put it into some sort of like final presentation, so that you get practice communicating, and then also it kind of acts as a networking tool as well. I know NFL teams might not post a job, but a lot of times they'll reach out strictly to people that did well in the big data bowl. So just participating in things like that is really a way to just help yourself on all levels, I think.
Justin and Mark, anything to add to that? Or would you kind of just echo the same thing of try a bunch of different things, get your work out there, meet people?
Yeah, I want to highlight what Zach said about networking. Personally, I found it very important to go and, not to pass around your resume to everyone that you meet or hand out your own business card or any of that, but to just talk to people and get to know them and their background and how they got involved in the game and how they wound up in the role that they're in. There's a ton of different ways to do it. There's no cookie cutter path. And a lot of the times it's pretty difficult to even know what you want to do in the industry before you even get in it, because a lot of teams like to, put the curtain down and don't necessarily love opening up all the different positions they have available and what specifically they do. And so sometimes just meeting a friend who gives you a little bit of advice on, what a position is like, or, how they arrived at that position is just as useful as getting your resume seen by somebody.
So we have a question here from Kyle Chin about kind of discussing the merits of getting a graduate degree and using that to learn more technical skills, or just kind of hopping into the industry and learning from there. Do any of you have an opinion about that?
It's something I always kind of battled with. I never really knew the answer as well. But I have found that since I graduated, I've learned so much, just whether it's doing side projects or just kind of out of curiosity and researching. And I think like grad school can get you a good structured environment for that. And I'm sure it's not going to hurt. It's just, I really don't know if the payoff is worth it. But you still learn so much after graduating undergrad that, I don't think it's necessary. I know some like higher level positions might say it's preferred, but if you can show that you have the skills, I don't really think it would matter too much.
Yeah, I would agree and echo that. I think there's really no way to replicate the hands-on experience within a professional or sports organization. And so if you have the right opportunity in front of you and can pursue that type of role, for me that would be the best way to go about doing it. But I agree, there's really no there's only going to be benefits from going back to school and getting that additional skill set or educational component, as long as it's in service of your long-term goals.
All right, kind of going off of that, how important is it to have the analytical skills do the job versus understanding the specific sport and like having a high level concept of what you're doing? Like, what's the trade-off there?
I would say it probably depends what you're looking for. Like if you're someone that is kind of just getting started and you just want to work in sports and you don't really care what sport it is, or you don't know what kind of role within sports you want to do, then I think just focusing on the analytical skills is probably fine at that stage. If you kind of know what you want to work in, like there's so much context of just knowing things about the sport that would make your analysis mean so much more. And you can just when you can kind of answer a question that the data might not show a favor to either side, it's just you're going to add so much more context and depth to your analysis.
Yeah, kind of to piggyback off that, I mean, at the end of the day, for me personally, I'm an analyst. That's my title. So it starts with having those analytical skills. I can walk into another industry and not know much about it and kind of gain that knowledge as I'm there. So for me personally, I feel like the critical thinking skills, as well as what we were talking about earlier, the communication and knowing your audience and your presentation skills, all of that wraps into the general umbrella of an analyst, regardless of what industry you work in. So I do think it starts with that, but that by no means diminishes what it actually entails to have a sense of the game. There's been plenty of times in my career where having that additional knowledge, I played club baseball at Ohio State. I stayed involved pretty actively with baseball, always went to games growing up, and I had that knowledge, and sometimes that gives you a different lens to view a problem. And so like I said, it definitely doesn't diminish to have that kind of knowledge, but at the end of the day, you're still an analyst. So those technical skills and presentation skills are number one for me.
I would agree with both. Nothing really to add there.
So kind of going off of that balance between those, how much of your like day-to-day job is spent on the technical side versus the communication, like meetings and that side?
Since I'm not with a team right now and we're in a startup, it's very fast paced. I would say it's definitely a lot smaller on the communication, like communicating like data finds, just because I'm working with a very small team. And if I'm doing work, it's usually I'm communicating with the other data people. So I'm not doing a lot of the non-data communication right now for me. But I'm sure that's very different when you're with a team.
Yeah, I would say for me, in my current role, in more of a manager role, my responsibilities day to day are kind of less technical and in the weeds. But for us, it's heavily dependent on the calendar and the time of year. For example, right now this is our hiring season, and so we're in my role heavily involved in those interview and those hiring processes. So a lot of communication, a lot of meetings, a lot of organization of process and timeline to make sure we're meeting those markers and goals throughout the season. But depending on the time of year, I try to dedicate at least some portion of my time to being able to keep those skills sharp and make sure I'm engaged with our teams that are doing that work and involved on a more detailed or day-to-day timeline.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the role and what time of year it is. For example, when I was on the player development side of things, there was very little, desk work and technical stuff that went into it. It was a lot of on the field and assisting the coaching staff and stuff like that. And I kind of went to the exact inverse when I went to the internship in analytics. It was not a lot of on-field stuff. It was a lot of technical work at the desk, at home. And then in my current position, it's definitely a balance depending on the time of year. When we're in season, when we're getting close to the draft, there's a ton of meetings, a lot of communication. There's very little time for any, data moving or analysis. It's mainly getting everything organized with the team. And then outside of that, when it's the summer, fall, even a little bit of the early spring and winter, there's, a lot of research that you can go and do, or a lot of data needs that need to be fulfilled. So as Mark said, it really depends on the role as well as the time of year, specifically in baseball. I can't speak for other sports.
All right. Moving on, I think as somebody on the outside looking in, I'm really interested to know what are kind of some misnomers about the industry that like everybody in college is like all raring to go, and then they get there and like, that's not what I thought. Or like, what do people need to know if they really do want to explore this as a career?
Data's never clean, I guess. It's a lot different when your professor kind of like, gives you a clean file for a project versus you have to go collect all the data yourself and you don't know if it's clean or not. Like just making sure it's in the right format or there's no errors. I think that's kind of both a small but also extremely impactful thing.
I would definitely agree with that. There's a lot of third-party vendors in the amateur space that do a lot of unique things, and sometimes their data is less than perfect. Another thing I want to throw out there is when they say, this position requires long hours, potentially working weekends and holidays, that's not an exaggeration. The hours tend to be very long. To work in sports, what I've found to be the most useful and the best people that I've met at their jobs, they tend to really love it. It's not something that is a career path that you can walk easily. if you don't genuinely enjoy what you're doing. And that's not something you might even realize until you've had the position for a little bit, or you've spoken to a ton of people and have a really good understanding of it. But in my experience, the best people at their jobs who I've met in the industry tend to really enjoy it and don't mind, working those 70, 80-hour weeks, or, working holidays or traveling and at all points of the year. So.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those. The other two that came to mind for me, I'm sure many of you have heard this from others, but you're likely going to be able to earn more in compensation outside of the sports industry than you are inside the sports industry. That's always good to have in your mind going in. The second, I think, is kind of keeping your expectations in check with respect to your involvement in what tends to be the public discourse. To use professional baseball as an example, right? Player personnel decisions, trades, acquisitions, signings, right? Everybody has a role to play, and you as someone who's starting out in the game may not be as involved in those types of decisions as maybe you thought you would be going into it. So, understanding that those things take time to be a part of, and the goal is to be ready when it's your time. But putting in the work and trusting that those who are around you are going to pass that work along in the right way and communicate effectively. There's some trust required there, and it may not always feel like or what you thought you were getting into originally.
I think those are all important things to know. But one thing I'd like to ask all of you is, you could go back to college, say maybe freshman, sophomore, junior year. Is there something that you would have done differently? Something that, thinking back on it now, you're like, well, that would have been a good idea. Or did you kind of just have a great path to where you are now?
I would say probably just start getting involved earlier. And I think it's something I kind of stumbled upon rather than like just started actively doing. But just once you kind of get inside of like learning like what sports analytics actually is, or listening to people in the industry kind of talk about, their advice or things like that, it's like you start to learn, the box kind of gets open for you, kind of like you actually start to learn what it's all about. It's not just, like playing a video game, it's like there's so much that goes into the work, the day-to-day, you're dealing with human beings. It's not all numbers. So I think getting involved earlier, just so I can, one, start building the necessary skills earlier, but also like start to meet people earlier, start to, tailor expectations and all that stuff. So I can just be, hone the right skills, and, have more time to do that, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Getting involved earlier. For me, I think the way I look back at it, taking some more statistics oriented classes would be one thing personal for me. But and then the third was, not just getting involved in school or on campus, but taking advantage of opportunities outside of the academic arena, in the, whether it's for us, summer opportunities in baseball, non-affiliated opportunities, but just opportunities to get experience around the game that you can use to build your resume. And as Zach mentioned, just start meeting people, building relationships, and having conversations with people within the game.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add on to both of those things. The biggest one for me was reaching out and networking to more people a little bit earlier in the college career. About midway through college is when I realized that sports analytics was a path that I wanted to walk down on. And to be able to have that extra semester or full year of, being able to reach out to people on LinkedIn or talk to your professors who might know someone in the industry, and getting a feel for what their career is like and how they got there. The more stories you hear and understand, the little bit easier it is for you to formulate how you want to approach getting a job once you graduate.
So I know we've talked a lot about kind of getting that practice in, starting your own projects, getting like a portfolio together of kind of work. But I think a lot of people struggle to find that starting point. So going into a project, how do you get started? How do you like find that question?
So I think the thing that was most important for me, and it's actually what Dr. Draper said to me when we were working my 5th year, but find a question that you're just genuinely interested in, and make sure that the question is framed around something that you can actually get to an endpoint. And like the first thing is just get to that endpoint, like get the data and try to answer the question. It doesn't have to be the best technique. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be like the best thing out there. If someone's already done it better, like that's fine. But just getting from like finishing a project all the way through is like such an important experience. And then you learn so much through that process that you can then go back and kind of like fine tune things or upgrade things as you continue to learn and get more comfortable with the data. So I think it's find something that you're interested in and make sure it's not something that, you know, isn't achievable, because I think, like I said, just being able to finish a project is super important.
I would agree. I would say, don't feel like you're getting hung up on, the question has to be one that nobody's ever asked before. Just replicate something that somebody else has already done and published. And as Zach said, continue to build those skills. And as you do the work, you'll start to have questions or think of new things that you'd like to pursue, and build from there. I think that's kind of that the first step is the hardest one type of situation.
Yeah, just to echo what they said, it doesn't have to be a novel idea, right? Personally, the project that I did with John when I was in undergrad, it stemmed from something that I read at one of the SABR conferences when I was looking back at some of the older ones and some of the other research done. And it was piggyback research. And, sometimes all it takes is reading one of those papers to spark an idea of, a way that you could get from point A to point B more efficiently, or in a different manner, or even, starting from a different point to get to the same endpoint. Reading a lot of research that's out there that's already been done can kind of help spark and generate those ideas for you.
So we had a question from the attendees. They were wondering if you guys could expand on a project that you've done in the past, maybe like the first one you can remember, kind of where you got started.
Well, I can kick us off with that one. I just kind of alluded to it briefly. The project that I did as an undergrad was modern late round drafting efficiency in Major League Baseball, and basically took a 20-year sample of players on day 3 of the draft and diced it up in a whole bunch of different ways to kind of see, answered the overarching question of, did some organizations find more value in the later rounds of the draft than others? And, it's a pretty broad question. It's a difficult question. There's a lot of variables that go into it. Different directors at times, different decision makers, even the draft was different at several periods, during the 20 years. But at the same time, having that kind of question where there are several ways to answer it. And you're just kind of digging into the data and feeling it out for yourself. And sometimes you don't even have the right path or your final path as you start it. And you're just kind of exploring and learning about the data set and something that you're interested in. I found that to be very beneficial, because that turns a rather daunting project that, takes months and especially to get into a final project or a final, presentation ready project. it can take time. And so you want to be interested in it. As has been mentioned, you want to be able to have a way to answer that question in some way, shape, or form. But it is something that is very beneficial for you, because those are the kinds of big, daunting projects that you could be landing on your desk when you land your first job. So.
Yeah, for me, one that comes to mind, if maybe those of you who are familiar with the Reds and some of our track record with international signings, we signed several players in the Cuban market several years ago. And so, kind of the genesis of the project was, what is, where do we want to assign these players once they come to the United States? What is our best option as far as their player development plan, their player development track? And so, historically going back through evaluating what other clubs have done, what other players coming from similar backgrounds or who are of similar ages had done in the past, and, presenting a set of options and, a recommendation based on all of the available information to best service that player.
I think like the first project I can really remember doing is probably like sophomore and junior year of college probably. And I tried to make like a baseball game prediction model. And I guess like calling it a model is probably like an insult to models, but it was one of those things where like, I think like kind of what we all mentioned before, but like I knew what I wanted to do and I kind of just gave it a shot. I started doing it in Google Sheets first, and kind of just collecting basic data from fan graphs and stuff like that. And then, like I got really lazy entering in lineups every day. So, I taught myself how to web scrape in Python. And like, that's, I think another just example of, if once you just get the ball rolling on something, like you never know kind of where it's going to take you or what things might pop in your head and skills you'll gain. But, it was nothing special. It was like a pretty like bad, model, but like it's still, it's still like a project and a good experience to kind of realize like how much work actually goes into, building good models or doing good data work.
So as we're nearing kind of running out of time here, I'll ask the audience if anybody has any last minute questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll see how many we can quick fire here. And then for you three, any like final bits of advice or anything you want to tell people?
Yeah, I can start. Oh, go ahead, Zach.
I was just going to say, like, for a lot of stuff, especially in the beginning, like perfect is the enemy of good. And like, no one in data like knows all of the techniques or all of the ways to do something. So like, you don't have to be perfect and like know your textbooks front to back or anything. Like, just make sure that you, like we talked about before with communication, it's like know how to like obviously learn different things and like get good at them, but you don't have to know everything, and you're never going to know everything.
Yeah, for me, it's don't be discouraged. It's a difficult path to walk down and to get your foot in the door and kind of have that moment where you can get behind the curtain a little bit. It's not easy for necessarily everyone. I know people who applied for exactly one job in sports and got it. And there are plenty of other people like myself who the first time out of college applied for about 60, heard no in about 25 or 30 different interviews, and at the end of the day only had one job opportunity in front of them. And so everybody has their own unique path, as we've said before, but don't be discouraged, because sometimes a lot of windows will close for different reasons that are out of your control. And it's important to be perseverant if this is something you're really passionate about and really want to do.
Yeah, I would totally agree with both of those. the only other thing I would add is as we talked about, don't forget about the communication skills and the relationships that you have the opportunity to build. Those are going to pay dividends and also serve, as a source of great joy. That adds to the experience in the game. Is the people you're working with, the people you're putting in all those long hours with, make it all worth it when you're able to achieve good things as a group in the end.
I think on that note, we're going to wrap up here and let Trenton set up for the next panel, which is going to be the hockey panel. I'd like to thank Zach, Justin, and Mark for spending the time with us and providing a lot of insight. Hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Nice meeting you guys.
Thank you, Alex, for having us.